poisons that wear the mask of pleasure. There are meals that fill the body and starve the soul. The modern world has perfected the art of selling emptiness wrapped in flavor. We are a generation overfed and undernourished, not merely in stomach, but in spirit. The shelves are full, the screens are glowing, the plates overflow, yet something in us remains hollow, restless, perpetually hungry for what cannot be packaged, marketed, or consumed. The tragedy is not that we are starving, but that we have forgotten what true nourishment tastes like. The ancient teachers once warned that appetite is a servant that easily becomes a tyrant. What begins as a craving for sweetness becomes an addiction to sugar. What begins as a desire for comfort becomes a worship of convenience. And the same law that governs the body governs the soul. We have learned to snack on inspiration without digesting truth. We binge on pleasure but rarely taste peace. We fill our minds with noise and call it knowledge, our calendars with motion and call it meaning, and all the while something in the depths cries out for substance. The enemy of the soul has no need to frighten you anymore. He only needs to feed you. He knows that a glutton does not run to battle. He knows that if he can keep you grazing endlessly on the shallow and the sweet, you will lose the taste for what is sacred. He does not come with horns and fire. He comes with advertising. He sells you comfort disguised as blessing, distraction disguised as destiny. His table is filled with glittering crumbs, and the more you eat, the emptier you become. The first spiritual junk food is comfort, the most seductive flavor of all. It promises peace, but produces paralysis. Comfort whispers, "Stay where you are, you've done enough." It offers you the illusion of safety while quietly stealing your strength. The comfortable life dulls the edge of vision. You stop reaching, stop stretching, stop risking. You trade the wild hunger of purpose for the lukewarm satisfaction of predictability. And before you realize it, your spirit has grown soft, not from kindness, but from complacency. The soul was made for mountains, not mattresses. It was designed for pilgrimage, not stagnation. When comfort becomes your God, growth becomes your sacrifice. The second junk food is approval sweet, at first bite, toxic in its aftertaste. Nothing corrupts the spirit faster than the craving to be liked. We live in an empire built on applause, where validation is the new oxygen. Every post, every opinion, every moment becomes a performance before an invisible crowd. But what is celebrated in the marketplace of men is often despised in the kingdom of heaven. Approval teaches you to trade authenticity for attention, to shape yourself into what pleases others rather than what honors truth. You begin to live in mirrors instead of windows, seeing only reflections of expectation. And the more you eat of it, the hungrier you grow, until your identity depends on the approval of those who do not even know your name. The third junk food is excess, the belief that more will finally be enough. It is the lie of the age of abundance. That fulfillment lies on the other side of acquisition. You buy what you do not need, to impress those you do not love, to fill a void that things cannot touch. Your home becomes a museum of possessions, each one whispering the same false promise, "I will complete you." But the soul cannot be filled by ownership. It is fed only by surrender. The more you gather, the heavier you become, until what you own begins to own you. Simplicity is not poverty. It is clarity. To let go is not to lose, but to breathe again. The fourth junk food is noise, the constant hum that drowns the whisper of wisdom. Silence has become unbearable to us because silence reveals truth. The modern mind fears stillness the way darkness fears dawn. We fill every gap with sound music, chatter, scrolling, screens, because quiet makes us feel our smallness. But it is in that smallness that God speaks. The prophets did not hear him in the earthquake or the fire, but in the still small voice that the world now calls boredom. The soul grows sick in the absence of silence, not because silence is empty, but because it is full of what we have forgotten how to hear. The fifth junk food is comparison of poison disguised as motivation. It begins innocently, with admiration, and ends in despair. You measure your joy against someone else's highlight reel, your calling against their applause, your timeline against their triumphs. You begin to see your blessings as burdens, your journey as delay. Envy turns gratitude sour. The enemy does not need to rob you when he can make you despise what you already have. True growth begins when you realize that another's light does not dim your own. There is no competition between candles, only more illumination. The sixth junk food is hurry, the subtle disease of the age. We move as if chased by invisible deadlines, measuring worth by productivity, mistaking motion for progress. The world worships speed, but the soul blossoms only in slowness. Every sacred thing grows quietly. Trees, love, wisdom, character. Hurry kills them all. The devil cannot make you bad, so he makes you busy. He fills your days with trivial victories until you have no time left to win what matters. You cannot hear eternity when you are sprinting through seconds. And the seventh, the most dangerous of all, is self-sufficiency. It is the belief that you are the source of your own light. It flatters the ego while starving the heart. You begin to see yourself not as a steward of grace, but as its author. Pride disguises itself as independence, confidence, achievement, but it is still pride, the oldest poison in creation. The self-made man worships an idol carved in his own image. He forgets that breath itself is borrowed. He forgets that every success not surrendered to love becomes a chain. And when the applause fades, he finds that his kingdom was built on sand. These are the seven junk foods of the spirit, the glittering diet of a dying age. They keep the body moving and the soul malnourished. They promise abundance, but deliver emptiness. And yet the cure is not condemnation, but remembering. For the soul remembers what is real. Beneath all the noise, beneath all the cravings, beneath the restless hunger, it still knows the taste of truth. It still longs for what cannot be bought, scrolled, or consumed, the quiet nourishment of purpose, peace, and presence. The awakening begins the moment you taste the difference. The cure begins not with refusal, but with remembrance. For the soul does not heal by starvation, but by taste. Once you taste what is true, imitation loses its sweetness. The moment you experience genuine peace, false pleasure becomes bitter. The moment you feel purpose burning in your chest, comfort feels too small to hold you. This is how awakening begins, not through guilt or fear, but through contrast. Light exposes darkness simply by shining. Truth destroys lies simply by being beautiful. The first step of recovery is to learn to feel again. The modern heart, numbed by endless noise, fears sensitivity because it mistakes it for weakness. But to feel deeply is to be human again. To feel sorrow for your wasted days is not defeat, it is grace. Tears are not evidence of failure. They are evidence that the soul still breathes. When you allow yourself to grieve the time lost to distraction, that grief becomes the beginning of wisdom. For repentance is not self-hatred, it is self-recognition. It is the moment you finally look yourself in the eye and say, I remember who I was before the world taught me to forget. Then comes stillness. Silence is the fast of the soul. It clears the mind of excess, the heart of clutter. At first you will tremble in it. You will hear the echoes of your own unrest and want to run back to noise. But remain. Wait through the discomfort until quiet becomes companionship. You will begin to sense a presence beneath the stillness, the gentle, patient pulse of something eternal. That presence has never left you, it has only been drowned out, and when you rediscover it, you will realize that peace is not something to achieve, it is something to remember. Slowly, you start to exchange cravings for callings. You trade entertainment for engagement, approval for authenticity. You begin to feed on things that strengthen rather than numb you. Discipline, gratitude, learning, creation, service. These are not glamorous meals, but they are sustaining ones. Discipline tastes bitter at first, but it nourishes endurance. Gratitude seems small, but it multiplies joy. Learning stretches you, but it keeps the mind alive. Service empties you, but it fills you with purpose. Each act becomes a meal for the spirit, rebuilding what excess destroyed. And as the diet changes, so does the appetite. You start craving still mornings instead of restless nights. You find joy in the quiet completion of simple things. You begin to notice beauty again, the way light rests on a wall, the patience of trees, the laughter that asks for nothing. You feel, perhaps for the first time, the sweetness of sufficiency. The world has taught you to hunger endlessly. Heaven teaches you to be full. Simplicity becomes luxury. Contentment becomes victory. And gratitude, humble, wordless gratitude, becomes the feast that never ends. The detox is not a punishment, it is an unveiling. Each layer of illusion peeled away reveals a simpler truth, that you were never meant to be satisfied by anything smaller than love. Love of God, love of others, love of the work placed in your hands. Every other pleasure is shadow. When you live from love, even ordinary bread tastes divine. When you live for self, even abundance turns stale. The enemy sells spice to mask decay. Truth offers simplicity that never spoils. You begin to see that every act of consumption carries a choice, to feed vanity or to feed vitality. When you speak, do your words nourish or poison? When you work, do you create or simply accumulate? When you rest, do you restore or escape? The spiritual life is not a rejection of the physical, it is the sanctification of it. The body is not evil, it is the instrument through which the invisible becomes visible. Feed it well, move it with gratitude, use it for creation rather than comfort, and it becomes worship. And this new way of living does not shout, it moves quietly with dignity. You no longer rush to prove, you live to serve. You no longer chase validation, you radiate peace. You no longer fear missing out. You delight in being found, found within your own purpose, found within grace. The noise of the world fades into background static, and the melody of eternity rises clear again. This is the soul's true diet: silence for hearing, gratitude for sweetness, discipline for strength, humility for cleansing, love for life itself. And as you live this way, you will notice that what once tempted you now tires you. False sweetness can no longer satisfy, because you have tasted the fruit of peace. The witchcraft of the modern world loses its hold on those who have remembered joy. And joy, unlike pleasure, does not need constant feeding. It multiplies when given away. It is not an emotion. It is an atmosphere, a way of seeing. It does not come from escape. It comes from engagement. It is the reward of a life rightly ordered, where body, mind, and spirit move in harmony again. You stop fighting yourself and start flowing with the quiet rhythm of grace that has been playing since the dawn of time. The junk foods of the spirit will still call your name. Their scent will drift through memory, promising the old numbness. But now you know too much to return. You know that each false sweetness carried a hidden cost. Your time, your focus, your strength, your clarity, your wonder. And now that you have tasted freedom, you will not trade it again for a sugar rush of distraction. The enemy will whisper, "You're missing out," and you will smile, because you finally understand what you once called missing out was really being found. When the soul has fasted from illusion, true hunger returns not for sugar, but for substance. You begin to crave meaning the way the body craves air after drowning. You begin to long for usefulness, not recognition, for impact, not indulgence. The fire that once burned for pleasure now burns for purpose. It is a gentler flame, but it glows longer. It lights not only your own path, but also the faces of those walking beside you. This is the quiet transformation. The world rarely notices the resurrection of meaning in a heart once addicted to noise. Wealth, once an idol, becomes an instrument. You start to see money as energy neutral until directed by intention. It is no longer a mirror of your ego, but a magnifier of your purpose. You begin to ask of every purchase, does this expand my soul or shrink it? You begin to notice how easily greed hides behind the mask of ambition, how quickly generosity can dissolve guilt, how deeply joy multiplies when shared. Wealth is not the enemy forgetfulness is. When you forget who you are, gold becomes God. But when you remember your origin, gold becomes gratitude in solid form. True abundance does not flow from accumulation, but from alignment. The more your work reflects your purpose, the more naturally provision flows. The modern world teaches that success requires sacrifice of self, but heaven teaches that success requires remembrance of self. The self created in the image of service, the self born to create, not compete. When your work becomes an offering instead of an obsession, prosperity follows like shadow to light, not as reward, but as resonance, the universe echoing your integrity. And yet, this abundance comes with a test, the test of stewardship. The enemy does not tempt you with poverty, he tempts you with misuse. He whispers that what you earn is yours alone, that generosity is weakness, that security lies in storing rather than sharing. But the one who hoards abundance eventually suffocates beneath it. The one who circulates it lives. Life is meant to flow. The river does not cling to the water that passes through it, yet it is never empty. This is the secret. The rich rarely learn, and the wise never forget. Possession without purpose leads to paralysis. You begin to see that wealth is a form of trust. Every resource, time, talent, treasure is a test of character disguised as opportunity. When you use what you have to lift another, you rise with them. When you hoard, you sink beneath the weight of your own fear. The irony is divine. The more you give, the more room you create for new blessings to enter. You cannot fill a closed hand. You cannot hear new truth while defending old lies. You cannot live free while gripping what was meant to pass through you. And so you learn to handle prosperity with open palms. You do not despise success. You sanctify it. You begin to build not for applause but for legacy, not for wealth but for witness. You measure growth not by numbers but by nobility, how much of your soul remains intact after the climb. You realize that the greatest wealth is not ownership, but awareness, the ability to look at all you have and know it cannot define you. You can use gold without bowing to it. You can hold power without becoming possessed by it. That is true mastery, to be in the world, but not owned by it. As your relationship with wealth transforms, so does your relationship with time. You begin to see time not as an obstacle to conquer, but as a garden to tend. You stop rushing through your days as though meaning were hiding in the next hour. You begin to live with deliberation. Every morning becomes an altar. Every sunset, a sermon. You measure your life not in speed, but in sincerity. The seconds you once spent escaping yourself are now spent expanding yourself. And in this slow rhythm of purpose, peace returns not as absence of work, but as harmony between doing and being. You also begin to recognize the sacred law of return, that what you put into the world is what you will one day meet again. When you give beauty, beauty comes back in forms you cannot predict. When you sow generosity, life responds with unexpected grace. The enemy taught you to exploit. Wisdom teaches you to enrich. Exploitation multiplies profit, but divides people. Enrichment multiplies meaning and binds humanity closer to its Creator. The soul that lives by enrichment never runs out of miracles, because every act of goodness becomes a seed that keeps growing long after the sower has left the field. And when your eyes open to this, even struggle becomes sacred. You stop resenting the weight on your shoulders, for you see that resistance is what builds strength. You stop asking for easier paths and start praying for clearer purpose. You realize that heaven never promised comfort, it promised completion. The goal was never ease, it was evolution. The true measure of wealth is not how much you own, but how much you become. Then something quiet shifts in you. Ambition no longer feels like hunger, it feels like stewardship. Success no longer feels like conquest, it feels like contribution. You stop trying to outshine others and begin to light them. The spirit of competition dissolves, and cooperation becomes the new creativity. You no longer see others as rivals, but as reflections of the same divine intention. The joy of another's growth becomes your own. This is the alchemy of the awakened, turning envy into empathy, power into purpose, labor into love. You see now that the junk food of the spirit was never just distraction, it was distortion. It made you forget that you were designed to create, not consume. Every human being is an artist, whether with words, wood, or kindness. Creation is the soul's truest appetite. When you build something good, you feed eternity. When you love deeply, you feed God Himself. To live without creating is to slowly starve the divine within you. And so you rise from the table of illusion and begin to cook with truth again, to prepare meaning, to serve it with joy, to share it without fear. This is how the healed live, not as monks detached from the world, but as alchemists within it. They turn work into worship, wealth into witness, rest into reflection, pain into poetry. They no longer ask, "What do I want from life?" but, "What does life want from me?" They live not to consume light, but to become it. And in that light, the soul finds its final nourishment purpose. When you begin to live from purpose, the world itself changes color. The sky no longer looks like distance. It looks like invitation. Work no longer feels like obligation. It feels like offering. Even suffering loses its edge, for you understand now that pain is not punishment, but polish. You were never being broken, you were being refined. Every setback that once felt like theft becomes a teacher. Every delay that once felt like rejection becomes direction. You stop asking, "Why me?" and start asking, "What is this shaping within me?" And that is the first sign that wisdom has taken root, when your questions turn from complaint to curiosity. Purpose is not found, it is remembered. It has been whispering to you since childhood, through wonder, through longing, through the quiet ache you felt when you saw something unjust and knew you were meant to make it right. The world tried to drown that voice in noise, to distract it with junk food for the heart, but it never truly died. It was buried beneath survival, beneath success, beneath the endless pursuit of what you were told mattered. Yet here, in the calm that follows awakening, you hear it again. It sounds like peace. It feels like coming home. You begin to see that your life was never random. Every encounter, every mistake, every detour was part of the same choreography, leading you back to the center of your soul, where meaning was waiting all along. You realize that purpose was not hiding in the future. It was growing quietly inside you through every trial you endured. And now that you have eyes to see, you no longer crave what the world sells as destiny, fame, fortune. Recognition for you have tasted something far sweeter, significance. Significance is not measured in applause, but in alignment. It is the invisible resonance between who you are and why you were made. When you live in that alignment, everything changes. Work becomes worship. Relationships become revelation. Wealth becomes witness. Even rest becomes holy. You no longer chase meaning because meaning chases you. You no longer run after love because love walks beside you. This is what it means to be whole, to live in harmony with the design that dreamt you into being. And yet, purpose does not make life easier, it makes it truer. The road narrows, but it glows. The days become quieter, but they hum with depth. The people who remain are fewer, but their presence feels eternal. You no longer fear solitude, because solitude has become communion. You no longer fear failure, because failure has become fertilizer. You no longer fear death, because you have already begun to live eternally, not in duration, but in direction. Eternity is not a length of time, it is a quality of awareness. To live with purpose is to live with eternity in every breath. You begin to understand that every soul carries a sacred assignment, not to escape the world, but to redeem it. The world does not need more critics or cynics. It needs more builders of hope, more craftsmen of peace. You were not born to expose darkness, but to outshine it. You were not born to repeat opinions, but to reveal truth through your living. When you stand in integrity, when you forgive the unforgivable, when you love the unlovable, when you give without expectation, you become the sermon the world forgot how to preach. You do not speak light, you embody it. And when you live this way, even the smallest act becomes eternal. A kind word becomes an echo in heaven. A patient silence becomes a prayer. A humble deed becomes a revolution invisible to the world, but seen by eternity. The devil's economy counts coins. God's counts ripples. Every act of good ripples through generations, long after you have left the room. That is why true wealth cannot be measured in moments or material. It can only be measured in meaning. The modern age will still try to feed you its glittering emptiness. It will tell you that happiness is a product, that fulfillment is a purchase, that you are the center of your own universe. But you have tasted reality now. You know that the soul does not thrive in isolation, but in connection, that joy cannot be owned, only shared. You will see the world continue to rush toward pleasure and call it progress. But you will not envy them. You will smile, not in superiority, but in sadness, mixed with compassion. You have walked that road, and you know where it ends, in exhaustion, in hollowness, in hunger that never sleeps. You will remember the difference between the fast food of the ego and the slow feast of the spirit. The ego eats to escape. The soul eats to evolve. The ego wants to be admired. The soul wants to be useful. The ego collects. The soul connects. And as you live from the soul, you will begin to see miracles in ordinary motion. You will look into the eyes of another person and see the same divine spark staring back. You will realize that the distance between heaven and earth was never vertical but internal, a veil that lifts whenever love is chosen over fear. When that happens, the old appetites lose their grip. You no longer crave what dims you. You no longer envy what distracts you. You no longer need what empties you. You are full, and yet ever expanding. For fullness in the soul is not static, it overflows. You become a fountain, not a bucket. You give because giving feels natural, not noble. You forgive because peace tastes better than pride. You love because to do anything less feels like dying. And one day, when you look back, you will see that the journey was never about rejection of the world, but the redemption of it. You were not meant to escape pleasure, but to elevate it, to teach it its rightful place beneath purpose. You were not meant to despise wealth, but to sanctify it by generosity. You were not meant to destroy desire, but to direct it toward creation. This is the balance heaven always intended. The human fully alive, desires disciplined by wisdom, power guided by love, will anchored in faith. Then the silence will return, not the silence of emptiness, but of completion. You will sit beneath the same sky, walk the same streets, work with the same hands, but everything will feel different. The air itself will hum with gratitude. The heart will no longer race. It will rest. You will understand finally that abundance was never somewhere to reach. It was something to remember. And if someone were to ask you, what is the meaning of all this? You will not need to answer with words. You will simply smile, because the answer will be alive in your eyes. It will be there in the way you listen, in the way you serve, in the way you love, without needing to be loved in return. That will be your sermon, silent, steady, sacred. For the soul that has been healed of illusion does not preach, it radiates. It does not argue, it anchors. It does not boast, it blesses. It does not hunger, it overflows. And so you will walk in peace through a world still hungry, knowing that the only true food was never what entered the mouth, but what flowed from the heart. Night falls, but the darkness no longer frightens you. It folds itself around you like cloth. And for the first time you understand that even shadows belong to the same tapestry of light. The city hums in the distance, engines, laughter, 1,000 small distractions, yet beneath it all there is a deeper rhythm, the slow heartbeat of the world remembering itself. You stand still and listen. The noise passes through you, but it does not enter. You are full of silence now. And silence is not the absence of sound, but the presence of peace. You look at your hands, the same hands that once reached for comfort, for approval, for excess. And they look different somehow, not because they have changed, but because you finally see them as they were meant to be, instruments of giving. Every line, every scar, every mark becomes a map of grace. You see that nothing was wasted, not the detours, not the delays, not the pain. All of it led here to this quiet awareness that life itself is holy, and that holiness was never somewhere else waiting to be found. It was woven through every ordinary moment you once overlooked. A breeze moves through the trees, and the leaves shimmer like prayers. You close your eyes and breathe one long, deliberate breath. You feel the weight you carried for years finally slide off your shoulders and fall into the earth, where even burdens become compost for new beginnings. Gratitude rises in its place, not as emotion, but as understanding. You were never separate from the source that made you. You were never abandoned. You were simply asleep. Every hunger was a homing signal. Every craving was the echo of a deeper calling to remember. You think of the world still chasing its illusions, and instead of anger you feel compassion. For you see now that every soul, in its own way, is reaching for the same thing, the taste of meaning, the warmth of belonging, the quiet of peace. Some find it through triumph, some through loss, some through breaking completely open. But all roads, if followed honestly, lead back to love. And love, once found, needs no defense. It explains everything by existing. The horizon begins to pale. Dawn approaches, and the first light touches the edges of the clouds like ink turning to gold. You realize that this gentle arrival of morning is how truth always comes. Not with noise or spectacle, but with the persistence of light that refuses to stop shining. It doesn't argue with darkness. It simply appears, and the darkness cannot hold its ground. You begin to walk. There is work ahead. There are faces to meet. There are ordinary hours waiting to be lived. But they no longer feel ordinary. Every step feels like worship. Every breath feels like prayer. You carry no doctrine, no demand, no need to convince, only the quiet radiance of one who has tasted the real and can never again be satisfied by imitation. And as the sun climbs, you whisper to yourself, or perhaps to God, thank you. Not for the gifts, not for the victories, but for the awakening, for the hunger that led you home, for the emptiness that made space for everything that matters, for the grace that feeds without cost, that fills without end, that waits without hurry for every soul to return to the table. The day opens around you. The world is still noisy, still flawed, still rushing, but you walk through it untouched, anchored in quiet abundance. The junk food of the spirit no longer tempts you. You have tasted the banquet of truth. And now, wherever you go, you will leave the fragrance of that feast behind in your patience, your generosity, your stillness. For the awakened do not preach. They simply live, and their living becomes light. And somewhere, unseen but certain, another soul catches the scent of that light and begins to hunger for real food again. The chain of remembering continues, and eternity breathes on.